My father sacrificed my future to favor his friend's son, and now they're dealing with the fallout. I never imagined I'd be writing this. It's one of those moments where you look back and wonder, how did things end up this way? But here I am. I'm 28 now, and as time goes by, I realize how much my past has impacted me, not in a poor me sense, but in a way that makes it clear how everything unfolded. It all traces back to one person, my father. I was born into less than ideal circumstances. My mom left right after I was born, not because she passed away, but because she packed up and disappeared without a trace. No goodbye, no note. One day she was there with me in the hospital, and the next she was gone. No one has any idea where she went. Sure, I've heard the usual explanations about mothers feeling overwhelmed or not ready for a child, but as a kid, none of that mattered. All I understood was that she wasn't around, and somehow that made me the enemy in my dad's eyes. From my earliest memories, I sensed my dad's resentment toward me. At first it was subtle. He'd be distant, cold, and practically devoid of emotion. As a kid, I didn't understand it, but as I grew older I realized it was more than just being cold. He genuinely hated me. Why? Because I looked like her. I never met her, but from the photos I've seen, the resemblance is uncanny. And I guess every time he saw me, it reminded him of her walking out. That's a heavy burden to place on a child, isn't it? Living in that house felt like tiptoeing over broken glass, but the worst part was that I never understood what I was doing wrong. I was just a kid trying to navigate life, but to him, I was a constant reminder of the woman who had left. He wasn't abusive in the physical sense, but the lack of warmth or affection. That messes you up in ways you don't recognize until much later. He made sure I had food and clothes, but that was where his parenting ended. There were no "I'm proud of you" moments, no hugs, no simple chats at the dinner table. Just a void. And then there was Liam. Liam was the son of my dad's best friend. When Liam's dad died in a car crash and his mom ended up in a mental health facility, my dad took him in. Liam came to live with us when we were both about 7, and from then on, everything changed. You'd think having another kid around might brighten the atmosphere or give me a friend, but that wasn't the case. Liam wasn't just another kid, he was the son my dad always wished he had. The way my dad treated Liam was night and day compared to how he treated me. Liam had all the qualities I didn't. He was outgoing, confident, and athletic, the kind of kid who could charm anyone. I, on the other hand, was quiet and introverted, preferring to read and keep to myself. To my dad, I was a reminder of my mom's betrayal, while Liam was the shining star. I never stood a chance. I can recall so many times when I tried to do something that I thought would impress my dad, but it never worked. Like the time I spent weeks on a school science project, a model of the solar system that could actually rotate. I thought, this is it. This will finally get his attention. I came home excited to show him, but he was on the couch with Liam watching a football game. When I mentioned the project, he barely acknowledged it with a nod before turning back to the TV, as if I wasn't even there. Meanwhile, Liam could draw a mediocre picture, and my dad would proudly put it on the fridge like it was a masterpiece. The favoritism wasn't just obvious, it was blatant, and he didn't bother to hide it. But the hardest part wasn't the clear preference for Liam, it was the fact that I kept trying. I kept believing that if I did just one more thing, he'd finally see me, finally care. But nothing I did ever made a difference. As we grew up, things only worsened. Liam and I attended the same school, and even though I consistently performed better academically, it didn't matter. Liam was the athlete, the popular kid, while I was just the smart one, and in my dad's world, that didn't count for much. He'd dismiss my achievements with remarks like, "Grades aren't everything," or "Liam has more important things to focus on." It was like nothing I did mattered unless it somehow connected to Liam's accomplishments. He was always the star, and I was just the sidekick no one paid attention to. I lost count of how many nights I sat in my room, wondering what was wrong with me, why I couldn't be more like Liam, why I wasn't enough. But it wasn't really about me, though I didn't realize it then. It was always about my dad, about his inability to process his own pain. He never moved on from my mom leaving, and instead of dealing with that, he directed all that bitterness at me. I can't even blame Liam, he was just a kid like me. But with the way my dad treated him, it's no wonder Liam probably felt like a hero. My dad made him feel like he was the center of the world, while I was just a background character. Now, looking back, I see how twisted the whole situation was, but as a kid, you don't understand that. You just keep hoping, thinking that someday your dad will look at you the way he looks at the other kid. But that day never came, and that's how it went on for years, just me, overshadowed by memories of my mom and by Liam. It took me a long time to understand that I had to stop chasing something that was never going to be mine. My dad saw Liam as some kind of miracle, like the perfect son he'd always dreamed of, and I became invisible in my own home. When I'd come home from school, I'd find them on the couch, laughing and watching TV as if I didn't exist. My dad started doing all kinds of things with Liam that he never once did with me, going to football games, fishing trips, even camping. I was never invited. I remember sitting alone in my room, listening to their voices carry from the living room, wondering why I was left out. It was like I wasn't part of the family. But it wasn't just that my dad ignored me, he constantly compared me to Liam. It was always, why can't you be more like Liam, or Liam wouldn't act like that, he'd praise how well Liam handled situations. It felt like I was always being measured against some invisible standard that I never even agreed to. Sure, Liam was good at sports, but that didn't mean I had to be. But to my dad, being myself wasn't an option. If Liam was athletic and outgoing, then I was expected to be the same. And the worst part? I tried. I thought maybe if I became more like Liam, my dad would finally notice me, maybe even treat me like I mattered, so I joined the basketball team even though sports weren't really my thing. I figured if Liam can do it, maybe I can too, but no matter what I did, it was never enough. I wasn't as skilled, as fast, or as confident as Liam. Once, I had a decent game, I scored some points and made a few good plays. I came home feeling proud, hoping my dad might finally acknowledge me. But when I walked in, he was already deep in conversation with Liam about his game, as if mine didn't even happen. I tried to tell him about my performance, but he just mumbled, "That's nice," before turning back to Liam. It wasn't just about sports either. Liam could get a B on a test, and my dad would act like it was a huge accomplishment. Meanwhile, I'd work hard for straight A's, and he'd barely notice. I'm not saying I was perfect, but I put in the effort. I wanted to make him proud, but no matter what I did, I was always trailing behind Liam. School wasn't much better. Even though Liam and I attended the same school, people treated us like night and day. Liam was the guy everyone gravitated toward, even the teachers. He was the one who lit up a room when he walked in. I was just Liam's quiet, odd brother, or the kid with the books. My dad's constant praise of Liam didn't help either. He'd brag about him to everyone, making Liam sound like this exceptional kid, and it felt like I couldn't escape the comparisons, not at home, not at school. Liam was always the one people wanted around, and I was just there. In high school, I remember a parent-teacher conference where my English teacher told my dad that I'd written one of the best essays she'd ever read. She said I had real potential as a writer. For a moment, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe this would be what finally made my dad proud. But he barely glanced up from his phone. He just asked if it would help me get a sports scholarship, then shrugged when the teacher tried to explain that not everything revolved around sports. I felt my face flush with embarrassment. It was as if my achievements didn't matter unless they were like Liam's. And that's how it went for years. No matter how hard I pushed myself, Liam was always the one who got the attention. I could spend weeks on a project and my dad wouldn't care, but if Liam doodled something, my dad treated it like a masterpiece. It felt like living in a shadow, always trying to catch up to someone who wasn't even trying. The thing is, I don't even blame Liam for most of it. He was just being himself. He didn't ask to be treated like royalty, and he certainly didn't go out of his way to make me feel bad. He was just living his life, being who he was. But that didn't make it hurt any less. I spent so much of my childhood and teenage years wondering why I wasn't enough, wondering what I'd have to do for my dad to look at me the way he looked at Liam. It felt like I wasn't even a real person to him, just a constant reminder of my mom and her betrayal. And maybe that was the core of it. My dad never saw me for who I was. He saw the woman who walked out on him, the one who left without a word. Instead of confronting that pain, he directed all his anger at me. He couldn't be upset with her, so he took it out on me. He couldn't tell her that she'd ruined his life, so he made me feel like I wasn't good enough. And Liam? Liam was the perfect distraction, the escape my dad needed from the reality of our situation. Looking back, I can see how twisted everything was, but as a kid I couldn't understand it. I just kept hoping that one day my dad would finally see me not as the reminder of his past, but as his son. But that moment never came. That's how things stayed for years, hidden in the shadow of my mom's memory and of Liam. It took a long time for me to realize that I was chasing something I would never have. My dad treated Liam like he was the answer to everything, like he was the son he always dreamed of, and I ended up becoming invisible in my own home. After years of trying and failing to earn my dad's approval, I did what most kids in my position would probably do. I gave up. I stopped putting in the effort because it was clear nothing would ever change. No matter how many times I tried to impress him, it was always the same story. Liam was the favorite, and I was just there. I spent my teenage years coasting by getting decent grades, staying out of trouble, and trying to keep my head down. But it was impossible to ignore the constant comparisons. Every time I overheard my dad praising Liam, it felt like a punch in the gut. When I finally left home, I thought I was leaving it all behind, leaving my dad, leaving Liam, leaving behind the feeling that I didn't matter. But that didn't last. After I moved out, Liam and my dad became even closer. Without me around as a reminder of my mom, my dad could focus entirely on his real son. They started spending more time together, doing things I didn't even want to know about. Eventually, I heard they started a business together. At first, I didn't pay much attention. I was too busy trying to figure out my own life. It seemed like just a small venture, something local that wasn't meant to be anything big. I gathered that Liam came up with the idea, and my dad jumped in wholeheartedly because, of course, Liam could do no wrong. I never knew exactly what kind of business it was, but knowing Liam, it was probably some flashy startup or side hustle that sounded more impressive than it really was. My dad put all his savings into it, fully backing Liam. I wasn't part of their world anymore, but I'd hear bits and pieces through people who still kept in touch with them. Occasionally, I'd hear about how the business was doing. People used to talk about how Liam was on the rise, making all the right moves, and every time I heard it, I felt that same old sting, like I was still stuck on the sidelines while he lived the life I'd never have. But then, things started shifting. At first, I didn't get the full picture, but I could tell something was off. People stopped bringing up Liam and the business as much. The constant updates about their incredible success began to fade, and the buzz around them seemed to disappear. I didn't think much of it since I was preoccupied with my own life and wasn't eager to reconnect with either my dad or Liam. Then one day I got a phone call. It was from an unknown number and I almost ignored it, but something told me to answer. When I picked up, I heard a voice I hadn't listened to in years, my dad's. The moment I recognized it, my stomach tightened. It felt like a lifetime since we last spoke, and I knew right away something was wrong. He didn't sound like the confident, almost cocky man I remembered. Instead, he sounded defeated. I didn't know what to say at first. He tried making small talk, asking how I was, but it felt awkward, like we were strangers with nothing in common, which wasn't far from the truth. Eventually, he got to the point the business had tanked, and it had gone downhill fast. Liam had taken all the money and vanished. Just like that, gone every penny my dad had put in, everything he had worked for, all of it disappeared when Liam skipped town. I didn't know how to respond. Part of me was stunned, but another part felt like it was just Liam being Liam. He'd always been great at charming people, and I guess my dad finally realized that too, the hard way. What really got to me, though, was that now my dad was asking me for help. After all those years of treating me like I didn't matter, making me feel like I was always second to Liam, he was now turning to me when everything fell apart, expecting me to step in and save him. I couldn't believe it. The same man who ignored me for years was now looking to me to fix the mess he was in. He told me he was drowning in debt, that everything was falling apart, and he didn't know what to do. He sounded desperate, like he had nowhere else to turn. But all I could think was, where was this when I needed help? I asked him why he wasn't seeking out Liam, and he went quiet, mumbling about how Liam wasn't around anymore, how he didn't know where he'd gone. My dad had poured everything into that business, and now he was left with nothing. I guess he finally knew what it felt like to be abandoned. But here's the thing, I didn't feel bad for him. Maybe I should have, but I didn't. Because for years he made me feel exactly that way, like I didn't matter, like I was just an afterthought. And now he was reaching out to me because his golden boy had left him. The irony wasn't lost on me. I didn't give him an answer right then. I told him I needed time to think, but deep down, I already knew what I was going to do. After I hung up, I just sat there, reflecting on everything, how much I had tried to make him proud, how much I had hoped to matter. And now he needed me. It felt like some twisted joke. But I wasn't that same kid anymore, and this time I wasn't going to fall into the same trap. I had my own life now, and I was going to handle things my way. After that call, I had a lot to think through. My dad coming to me for help felt surreal, especially after years of being treated like a background character in his life. Now, he needed me, and the more I thought about it, the angrier I became. Where was he when I was struggling? When I worked late into the night just to stay afloat, or when I dropped out of college because I couldn't afford it, where was he then? He never reached out, never asked if I was doing okay. But now, because Liam was gone, and he didn't have his golden child to rely on, I suddenly mattered. It didn't sit right with me at all. The more I replayed that conversation in my head, the more I realized something. This was the first time I had the upper hand. For years I had sought his approval, but now the tables had turned. But the difference was, I no longer craved his approval. I had spent too many years trying to prove myself to him, but after that phone call, everything fell into place. I didn't owe him anything. It wasn't my responsibility to clean up the mess he and Liam had made. He made his choices, and I had made mine, and my choice was to stand firm. Over the next few days, my phone was bombarded with messages from him. First, he tried to guilt-trip me with lines like, "I don't know what I'm going to do and you're my only hope." It was almost pathetic, especially coming from the same man who had once told me to man up when I was struggling. Now he sounded lost because Liam had let him down. At first, I didn't respond. I needed to process my own feelings before saying anything. Part of me wanted to cut him off completely, but another part still felt a twinge of sympathy. He was still my dad, and despite everything, a small part of me still cared, not enough to bail him out financially, but enough to at least consider a conversation. But every time I thought about calling him back, I remembered all the times I'd needed him, and he was nowhere to be found. When I was younger, I used to wonder why he never cared, why he never took the time to ask how I was doing, or if I needed anything. And now he was coming to me for help? It just didn't sit right. One memory kept coming back to me during those days. It was from high school, right after I got my first real job. I'd started working part-time at a grocery store, bagging groceries and stocking shelves. It wasn't anything glamorous, but I was proud of it. It was my job, and I was earning my own money, even if it wasn't much. I remember coming home that first day, excited to tell my dad, thinking that maybe, just maybe, this would be one of those rare moments where he'd actually be proud of me. But when I told him, all he said was, "That's nice. Is Liam still playing football this season?" It was like, no matter what I achieved, Liam was always the focus. I couldn't even have my own small wins without them being overshadowed by whatever Liam was doing. That memory haunted me as I thought through what to do next. After that phone call, I couldn't shake the reminder that I had always been second in his life, and now he was reaching out only because he had no one else, not out of any real care for me or desire to rebuild our relationship, but because he needed something. And I wasn't going to fall for it. Eventually, I decided it was time to respond. I didn't want to leave him wondering forever, but I also wasn't just going to give him what he was after. I took a deep breath and sent a short, direct message. "I'm sorry you're dealing with this, but I can't help financially. I've worked hard to get to where I am and can't put that at risk. I hope you find a way through." It was straightforward and to the point. I didn't owe him a long explanation, and I wasn't about to revisit years of mistreatment. That wouldn't change a thing. I just needed him to understand I wasn't his fallback option. After hitting send, I felt a rush of conflicting emotions. Part of me felt guilty. He was still my dad, after all, and some part of me wanted to help. But on the other hand, I felt a sense of relief. For the first time in my life, I had told him no. I'd drawn a line, and I wasn't going to cross it. He didn't reply right away, which honestly came as a relief. I think I needed time to process everything myself. But I also knew he wasn't the type to let things go that easily. Sure enough, a few days later, he called again. This time, I let it go to voicemail. I wasn't ready to speak to him yet. When I finally listened to the message, it was more of the same. He apologized again, said he wished things had turned out differently, and emphasized how much he needed my help. He even mentioned regretting some of his past actions, but the way he said it felt insincere, like he was just trying to say whatever he thought might persuade me to give him money. But I wasn't falling for it. The truth is, I wasn't the same person who had lived under his roof. Back then, I would have jumped at the opportunity to help, thinking maybe this would finally make him love me, maybe it would make him proud. But now I understood better. I didn't need his approval anymore, and I certainly didn't need to rescue him to feel like I had value. I had built a life on my own, without his support, and I wasn't going to jeopardize everything I'd achieved just because Liam had taken off with his savings. I had taken control of my life. But I knew this situation wasn't over. My dad wasn't one to give up easily, and I suspected there would be more to come. For a while, things were quiet. It was strange at first, like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders but left behind a void where all that tension used to be. I thought he might keep pushing, continue bombarding me with calls or guilt-filled messages, but nothing came. Days turned into weeks, and I heard nothing. Part of me was relieved, thinking maybe he'd finally understood that I wasn't going to bail him out. But another part of me felt unsettled, like I wasn't used to not having him take up space in my mind. For so long, I'd been trying to earn his approval, and now that I didn't need to anymore, It felt unfamiliar. Life moved on. I stayed focused on my job, kept taking my night classes, and for the first time in years I felt like I was actually getting somewhere. My friends noticed the change too. They'd comment that I seemed more relaxed or in a better mood. And they were right. I'd been carrying that emotional baggage for so long, but after setting boundaries with my dad, I could finally breathe. But of course, the peace didn't last. A few weeks later, my phone rang again. When I saw the number, I knew it was him. I hesitated, almost letting it go to voicemail again, but something told me to pick up, maybe curiosity, or maybe I just wanted some kind of closure. So I answered. This time, he sounded different. He wasn't as desperate, more weary. He didn't immediately start asking for money, which caught me off guard. Instead, he spoke about the past, admitting that he knew he hadn't been the best father, that he regretted not being there for me. It wasn't the first time he'd apologized, but this time it felt a bit more genuine. Yet even then, I couldn't shake the thought that he was only saying it because he had nowhere else to turn. He shared more details about what had happened with Liam, how he'd taken not only the savings but also the entire business they had built together. Apparently, Liam had been planning it for a while, siphoning money bit by bit without my dad noticing until it was too late. By the time he realized what was going on, Liam was long gone, and so was the money. As he explained all this, I couldn't help but think back to all the times my dad had favored Liam, how he'd put him on a pedestal while disregarding everything I did. And now he was left with nothing because of the person he'd always chosen over me. I felt bad for him, but not deeply. He had created this situation, and now he had to live with the outcome. I listened, but I didn't offer any sympathy. I think he noticed because, after a while, he stopped talking about Liam and just said, "I don't expect you to forgive me. I just wanted you to know what happened." That was it. He didn't ask for money, didn't try to manipulate me into helping. It was like he finally understood that I wasn't going to come to his rescue. When we hung up, I sat there, thinking it all through. It was strange. I had spent so many years hoping he'd admit he'd made mistakes, wanting him to apologize. But now that he had, I didn't know how to feel. I thought it would bring me closure, but instead it just left me feeling empty. It didn't change the past. He had still treated me like an afterthought, choosing Liam over me time and again. And now, just because his life had fallen apart, he thought he could make things right. But life doesn't work like that. The thing was, I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't holding on to the bitterness like I used to. I had moved beyond it. But I wasn't about to forget either. You can't just say you're sorry and expect everything to go back to how it was, especially when how it was had never been good in the first place. So I made a decision. I wouldn't cut him off completely, but I wouldn't let him back into my life either. I'd keep my distance, stay civil if he reached out, but that was it. No more chasing his approval, no more trying to mend what couldn't be fixed. In the weeks that followed, I kept pushing forward. I focused on my work, my classes, and the people in my life who actually cared about me. I started to see that I didn't need my dad's validation anymore. I had built something for myself, something I was proud of, and I didn't need anyone else's approval to keep moving forward. I spent a lot of time reflecting on how things could have turned out differently, how my life might have changed if my dad had been more present while I was growing up. Maybe I wouldn't have felt the need to constantly prove myself, or perhaps I wouldn't have faced so many challenges alone. But the more I considered it, the more I realized that those hardships shaped me into who I am today. Sure, it hurt that my dad wasn't there when I needed him, but I learned to stand on my own. I learned how to push through difficult times, how to keep moving forward even when everything seemed overwhelming. And because of that, I'm stronger now. In a strange way, I suppose I owe him not for being a supportive father, but for forcing me to become self-reliant. I've built my life independently and I no longer need him to feel whole. Update: recently, I found out that Liam, the guy my dad practically treated as his own son, ended up in jail. To be honest, it didn't come as a shock. After everything he did to my dad, it felt like it was just a matter of time before his actions caught up with him. It turns out that after he ran off with the money from their business, he tried to pull another scam, only this time, he targeted someone less forgiving than my dad. Liam thought he could use the stolen money to start fresh, but his plan backfired. From what I've gathered, he attempted to con another person out of a significant amount of cash, but this time the victim caught on and pressed charges. Before Liam knew it, he was in cuffs and facing serious legal trouble. I'll admit, when I first heard the news, I didn't feel any sympathy for him. This was the same guy who had taken advantage of my dad, draining everything he could before disappearing without a second thought. Now it seemed like karma had finally caught up with him. The irony of it all wasn't lost on me. My dad had always treated Liam like the perfect son, placing him on a pedestal while I was left behind. And now Liam was behind bars while I was out here, slowly building my life. I'm not sure what lies ahead for Liam, but honestly, it's not my concern. He made his decisions and now he's facing the consequences. Meanwhile, I'm moving on, leaving all that drama in the past. It's strange how life plays out sometimes. You grow up thinking that someone has everything figured out, only to see them unravel in the end. But that's no longer my story. Liam's journey is his to deal with, and I'm finally walking my own path.